Good morning, Javatarians. Today what we're going to do is take the homework assignment we had, the crab, lobster, and worm world, and add commands so that we can populate it automatically, so that we don't have to create a new crab and several new lobsters every time we want to run the scenario. We don't have to click and drag every time. Now, how do we do that? Well, we're going to copy some working code from the leaves and wombats world and adapt it to our purposes. We're given this code, we can use it. We're just going to, as a reminder, we're just going to call the populate method, and it automatically puts leaves and wombats into the world. We're going to take that command from here. So the method that we called is populate, so we want the entire method from opening brace to closing brace. We're going to copy that. Not the entire class, just the method. And we're going to put it into the crab world. Alright, now, it's clearly not ready to work. We don't want to create wombats and leaves. We want to create lobsters and crabs. But that's okay. So wherever we're creating a wombat before, we're going to turn it into a crab. So when you click on New Crab in the scenario, what you're really doing is executing this line of code. We create a new crab, we give it a name, and we'll call it Krabby for now. Right? That's what creates that crab that we place into the world. When we drag it into the world, we're using the method called addObject. And there are 3 parameters for that. Number 1 is the name of the object we just created. So we're calling the new crab Krabby. So we'll say we want to put Krabby into the world. Right? And the next 2 numbers are the coordinates of where it goes in the world. Right? In Java and graphics, you have x and y coordinates. So the first number is the x coordinate, the second number is the y coordinate, but it's measured a little differently than in your math class. Okay. 0, 0 is the upper left-hand corner of the scenario. The x coordinate measures how far you go across. The y coordinate measures how far you go down. So even though it's down, it's a positive number for the y coordinate. And the other piece of information we need is how big is the screen? Well, if you look up at the crab world, this line in the crab world class, you'll see what's called a constructor. We'll talk about that later. This first number, 560, is the width. The second number is the height of the screen, or of the scenario that we're using. You can adjust that to your purposes if you want, but what it's set up is 560 pixels wide, 560 pixels deep. So since this is the origin, the upper left-hand corner, the lower right-hand corner would be 560, 560. X and Y in the same order as graphing in a math class. Okay. So tell you what, let's put Krabby right in the center, which would be 280 and 280. Okay. So this will create, so this chunk of code will create 1 crab automatically when we call the populate method. Now we should always test when we add a piece of code to see if it works. So we'll take out the other wombats and leaves. What the populate method should do at this point is put 1 crab into the world and put it in the center of the world. So, and remember, because we have the hash marks, we need to compile it. Now if we right click on the scenario, we now have the method populate as an option. When we call it, Krabby ends up in the center of the screen. So instead of having to click new crab and drag it over, it automatically happens. Now we were also asked for 3 lobsters. So we'll just call the first lobster L1, and he is a new lobster. That creates the new lobster. And then again, we need add object in order to put the lobster in the correct place. So add object. First comes the name of the lobster, which is just L1. You can name it whatever you want. Just be specific that it is a lobster type of object here and here. And we don't want to put it on top of the crab. So tell you what, we'll choose 175 and 425. That will create one new lobster. Right? The instructions actually asked for 3, so we can do that. We'll just do this 2 more times. We'll test the code as soon as we have it. Now, beware, you have to give each lobster a different name, otherwise the computer won't know which lobster you're talking about. And when you add that object, the name needs to correspond. And let's put it in a different place, say 350, 350. Again, you can choose the places. Just know that it will go in that same spot every time. And we'll say 75, 500. So we've created one new crab, 3 new lobsters, each with a different name. Oop, that one needs to be L3. And using that name to add each lobster to the world. So let's test our new populate method to see if it really does add 1 crab and 3 lobsters. Congratulations, you've just automatically created 3 lobsters and 1 crab to your world. Right? They do act like the lobsters should. Excellent. Right. So this populate method, right, we took it from the pre-existing method from the leaves and wombats world, adapted it to our purposes, creating crabs and lobsters. It seems to work just fine. Now the other part of the assignment was from the exercise was to add many leaves. It didn't say how many. We have a method in here that does that. If you remember, there was random leaves, and you can specify how many random leaves will go in there. So again, random, we're not going to control where they go this time. We're going to leave that up to a random number. So again, we are going to take the working code, we're going to copy it, and we're going to adapt it to our purposes. So let's take the random leaves method from the wombat world. So it starts with the public void random leaves, and then everything that's in those braces in the yellow area. And we're going to copy it over to the crab world. Again, do not put it inside the braces for the populate method. They need to be separate. But it does need to be inside the green area where the class crab world starts and ends. Now some of this we haven't seen yet. This is the loop here. It's called a for loop. We'll see that in chapter 5 or 6. We'll see how that works. But the short description of it right now is that it does whatever's in this piece of code over and over and over again. Right? This number that you enter, how many, dictates, as you might guess, how many times it does that. So let's take this code and adapt it to our purposes. And we're not creating random leaves. We're going to be creating random worms. And the name of the method should always tell you what it's doing. So let's change it to random worm. Right. How many? That still describes what that number represents, how many worms we're going to create. And how do we do that? Okay. Well, instead of creating a leaf, like random leaves did, we're going to create a worm. So capital W worm, capital W worm. Right? And again, you created that new worm, you need to give it a name. We'll call it Crawley. Now, we want it to go into a random position. Okay. So we're going to take this piece of code out. Okay. Here's the add object command. How do we get a random number? Well, just like I said, we get a random number. So greenfoot dot get random number. And that parameter that you put in there denotes the range of the numbers. If we say get random number 560, that will get some random integer between 0 and 559. It will leave off the very end point. But that's okay. Right? That's pretty much, that's anywhere in the screen, and that's what we want. So that will be the x-coordinate. And we will make the y-coordinate a random number as well. So these worms will appear literally anywhere on the screen between 0, 0 and 559, 559. But again, it works just like it did up here. We create a new worm, we give it a name, we add that object. The name must match, it needs to say Crawley, or whatever name you choose. But the x-coordinate and y-coordinate are random numbers now. So let's try this, see if it works. Again, we changed Crab World, so we have to compile it again. So now the random worms method shows up with the integer parameter, which is how we wanted it to appear. The populate command, one crab, 3 lobsters. Random worms, let's put 15 in there. And so it will scatter 15 worms throughout the scenario, hopefully. Ta-da! So now we have worms placed randomly. We chose 15 of them, okay? So we don't have to click and drag every time. Using this principle of code reuse. We had working code from an earlier scenario. Okay? We adapted it to the new scenario that we're using. And as a result, we don't have to click and drag a new creature each time. We have a method that does that for us. So this is the main part of what you missed in class on Thursday. The other bit was we started the Chapter 3 worksheet. You can grab that off Moodle, or I'll give you one in class. We did the first 4 sections covering what we've done already. When we meet in class next time, we will continue on in Chapter 3. The first thing we'll be doing is adding keyboard control, using the up, down, left, and right arrows. Okay. See you then.